welcome to our third edition of Reclaiming My Mind. It's a local podcast in the Tampa, Hillsborough area, focusing on local politics and movements that are happening in our area. My name is Jessica Vaughn. I'm the host of the podcast and also the president of the Democratic Progressive Caucus of Tampa Bay. We have a webpage which you can go to if you want to subscribe to our podcast, aside from following us on Facebook, which is reclaimingmymind.org. Okay, so today we are welcoming Ione Townsend, who is the chair, not president, is that right? Chair of the Hillsborough Democratic Party. So thank you for joining us today and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And if you'd like to just take a minute and give me a little bit of background about yourself, and how you got involved with the party and when you were elected, that'd be great.
Okay, super. Well, again, thank you for having me. My name is Ione Townsend. I'm currently the chair of the Hillsborough County Democratic Executive Committee, aka the Hillsborough County Democratic Party. I'm hoping that the new bylaws gets rid of that term executive because it throws everybody off. People think it's a board.
Right.
And we're not. We're the county party. So that's important to clarify. So I'm a mom, 5 sons, a grandmom, 5 grandchildren, 4 grandsons, 1 granddaughter, nurse practitioner, married to a fabulous husband. Been living in Florida since 2005. My husband is a Florida born and bred, bleeds orange and blue. And, so I'm a Gator by marriage. And, so how did I get involved in the local party? Well, to begin with, I've been involved in politics since my early 30s. I can remember campaigning for George Mitchell and some local House candidates in the Auburn-Lewiston area in Maine, where I was born and raised. I would go knocking on doors, not knowing if I was knocking on a Republican door or a Democratic door.
So that was before Van.
Before Van, absolutely. Before
which is our
a lot of technology. Before cell phones even.
Oh, so just willy-nilly.
We had a sheet of green graph paper. Remember the green graph paper that we all use for everything? And I just had names and addresses on it, and I would go door to door with a couple of kids in tow, and so I've been active in that regard, helping local candidates since my early 30s. When we moved, I like to say permanently back to Florida, because that's where my husband was born and raised. It was in 2005.
Right. And
then I got involved in the Obama campaign in 2008 and have been very active since that time.
Okay. So that's always a good start.
Sure.
And then what made you, and when did you first serve as chair? What election year did you win chair of the party?
During Obama's 2008 campaign, I was living in Wesley Chapel. We moved to Hillsborough in 2010. After the 2014 election, I was so discouraged because we lost every race, I think, except for a school board race here in Hillsborough County.
Right.
I was upset and concerned about how our local candidates were being treated by the local party, by the state party, what lack of support they had. They had absolutely no support. So that's what got me concerned about local politics and the local party structure. I'd actually been recruited to join the county party in 2012 after Obama was elected the second time. And after the 2014 election, I was sitting with a couple of other women who were also concerned about what was going on in the local party, and we decided, okay, maybe we need to run for leadership.
Right.
So I ran for first vice chair in 2014 in December, was elected. And 11 months later, the new chair of the party, resigned. And so I became acting chair in November of 2015. And then, won election in 2016 to finish her term.
Right.
And then, won my own 2-year term in 2017 in December.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry, 2016 in December.
So it's a 2-year term, not a 4-year term?
It's a 2-year term.
Okay.
In Hillsborough.
Okay. And so then about 4 years so far?
Will be.
Almost.
Will be this December, 4 years, right.
All right. So, now that we're talking about the party and your role in the party, I want to give people a little bit of information about the party structure, which I kind of try to do every single podcast, because it's really complicated. And, I got involved a little over 2 years, 2.5 years myself, and I'm still learning stuff every single day to try to figure out how it works. So you had mentioned before we called it the Democratic Executive Committee, which the first time I heard that term DEC, I had no idea what people were talking about. So we've mentioned it before, but the DECs stand for county parties, right?
Correct.
So Pinellas has a DEC, which is their county party, and Pasco has a DEC, and all of those individual county parties have their own elected body.
Correct.
So they have a chair, a vice chair, state committee people who go on and then act in their name and vote at the state level for things. And then after the county party, the DECs, then we fall under the umbrella of the state party, Florida Democratic Party, or people see FDP. And that has its own elected body and a chair and a vice chair. And then that is under the umbrella of the entire national party, which people might see a lot more media coverage on, who right now are acting chair. Is it chair on the national level as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Tom Perez is chair.
Tom Perez, is our chair. So what do you think is the role individually of all these different parts of the party? Like, what is the job of the county party? What is the job of the state party? And then at the national level, as far as you see it?
Starting locally, all politics is local, right? We'll start local. So the structure begins with a precinct committee person, or I like to call it the old term, precinct captain.
Right.
It's one or more people who work together to organize and to get to know the voters in their precinct. And then the county is divided into, I think we currently have 390 precincts. And so the county is divided into all these precincts,
right,
and we come together as a Democratic Party, and the Republican Party comes together as the Republican Party, local party. So our job is to, at the county level, is to recruit candidates, train candidates, fund candidates when we can, help with fundraising for candidates when we can, and to engage the voter in local politics, assess the voter in terms of finding out what's on the voters' minds so that we can make sure that our candidates are up to speed with that and are addressing those issues, and our elected officials.
Right.
So we interface with the voter, elected officials, and candidates.
Okay. And then what would you say, or how does that relate to the function or the job of the state party?
The state party has a bigger view. So if we talk about it in mileage, we're on the ground. The state party flies a little higher, and they are involved in statewide elections, House and Senate elections for Florida legislature. And they direct the county parties. So
I've been involved in a few elections for the chair of the state party at this point. And what I've kind of been repeatedly told when we're talking about, different candidates and what value that they would have is that they're more of the fundraising mechanism that a majority of their job is to raise money for our candidates. Would you think that's an accurate portrayal, or?
No, I don't think that's an accurate portrayal, because there is a group called House Victory and Senate Victory, whose specific purpose is to raise money for House candidates and Senate candidates. So while the state party does have fundraising obligations, they work very closely and hand in hand with House Victory and Senate Victory. And at times their relationship has been very close. They've shared physical space. They have in the past shared accounts, bank accounts. So that's made it a little confusing, I think, for the average person to understand that they each have defined functions.
Right.
I think there's been a little bit more clarity in the last couple of years. There's been more separation. Senate Victory is now completely separated from the state party, from my understanding. House Victory still has a little closer relationship, but each of them are their own entities.
Okay, so those sound like they're fundraising parts of the party. Would
Correct.
you say, because I've had a disagreement with somebody recently about this, and that's one of the reasons that I've asked, is kind of discussing these complex roles and changes we want to make in the party, having an understanding of what, each division is responsible for helps people make decisions. And for me, when I think about it, at the national level, at the state level, or at the county level, the reason I'm involved is because the role or the job of the party is to get Democrats elected.
Correct.
One, and to then also have platforms and hold them accountable and steer the ship and, make decisions for the party as a whole. So when I see disconnect between making different decisions about the direction of our party and people saying, well, the state party's job is only to do this and we should be looking at the DEC, it's confusing to me. So would you say that on the national level, the state level, and the local level, although they might have, somewhat different specific bylaws and functions, that their main job is to elect Democrats?
That is their main mission.
Yes. Okay. So now we have a little bit of an understanding of how there's the county party and the state party and the national party. Then it gets real confusing, especially to people, between clubs and caucuses. And I've covered this a little bit in my first podcast with Susan Smith, president of the State Democratic Progressive Caucus. That caucuses generally fall under the state umbrella. Even if you have a local chapter of it, we're held accountable to the state party. And clubs generally fall under the umbrella and are chartered, meaning the people who say, okay, you can officially be a part of this organization. We give you your charter, your official, are under the county party. Is that correct?
You are partially correct. Okay. So, a local club must be approved initially by the county party.
Okay.
But its charter is granted by the Florida Democratic Party.
The Florida one.
Correct.
Okay.
So all clubs, all caucuses are actually chartered under the Florida Democratic Party. Okay. It's just clubs have another route they have to go through. Well, actually, caucuses do too. But the club route is local through the county party. So they have to have approval by the county party, and then they go to the state party for chartering. Caucuses get approved by their state caucus and then to the party for chartering.
So what would you say is the role of clubs and caucuses and why they exist?
Clubs and caucuses support the mission of the Democratic Party. Both at the county level and at the state level. There's a little difference in that caucuses tend to be more issues-based. So, for example, LGBTA caucus are more concerned with studying, discussing, recruiting candidates, and that type of thing who advocate for the rights of the LGBTQA community. Right. And the Disability Caucus, for example. And we have Karen Clay, who's our chair of our Disability Caucus, who's always reminding me that we can't have any venue, can't have any event without having it accessible to the disabled. So each one of the caucuses has a specific issue that they are specifically focused around. Now, there's some overlap.
Sure. Or a community that they're advocating for.
A community that they're advocating for, yeah.
And whereas, would you say the clubs are less specific and they're more of a social environment that's either regional or maybe based on some things that you'd have in common that are a little less specific to one community?
I think clubs are specific to their community, their geography.
Regionally.
If you will, regionally. correct. They focus more globally on issues, so they are not focused on one particular issue or a particular candidate. They focus more globally.
Okay. So then I guess that leaves me to, we have all these different avenues for people to become involved, which can be very overwhelming, right? Especially like, let's say it's post-election and you're reeling from what happened and you're saying, my goodness, I want to get involved. I want to do something. I felt like, I was apathetic in the last election and I really have regrets. How do I get involved? And you start to look at the list and there's the county party, and then there's clubs and caucuses, and there's the state level, and then there are all these different kind of, either post or pre-election advocacy groups that have sprung up. So what would you well, first of all, why should people specifically get involved with like the Democratic Party, do you think, if they're Democrats and they want to make some sorts of change?
Well, if they really want to be involved and to make a difference, and to help spread the Democratic mission, help spread the Democratic values, if you will, then getting involved in a club or a caucus or the county party is really important. That's not to say that resistance activism is not important, because that's very important also.
Sure.
It depends on what kind of an impact the individual wants. Does the individual want to push back on agenda?
Right.
Or promote a certain agenda? Or do they want to work hard at getting Democrats elected, getting the vote out? Those are the party responsibilities, is getting Democrats elected, getting the voters to the polls, engaging the voter, talking to the voter about why it's important to vote, that every vote matters. And we have multiple examples of that. Even last week, we have a perfect example of how every vote matters.
Right.
Which,
by the way, you're talking about the election.
The Connor Lamb
that happened
in West
in
Pennsylvania. Correct.
Just so people might know.
Right. 48 votes or something along that line. And in our own state, George Bush won Florida by 500 votes. So every vote matters.
Right.
So for the individual, it really depends on what kind of impact that they want to have and what comfort level they have in those kinds of activities that each one of those groups engage in.
Well, that leads me to kind of where I want to go next, is what I see. And, I decided to join the progressive wing of the party, when I decided to join the party, because I feel like personally, when I talk to voters who aren't involved with the party, who are my friends or people that I come across in Uber cabs sometimes, because I talk to everyone all the time, is that there is a disconnect from the party itself and, the values and quotation marks and our platforms and what we stand for. That a lot of party insiders feel very passionate about and have worked for, and a disconnect between that, and when you say, if you want to support the party and our ideas and our values, there's a disconnect between that and what voters see the party as. One of the reasons that I got involved in the progressive wing is because when I talk to voters, even if they're registered Democrats, the message that I get from them is they've lost faith in our party, that they don't really see a difference between the two parties when you look at some of the voting records. I mean, for example, Bill Nelson has a lot of controversy right now because he voted for the corporation where they deregulated the banks, which caused a lot of turmoil in the progressive community of people wondering, are our elected officials who are Democrats really voting in favor of the people? And I see this huge disconnect from people who are, will vote for Democrats because they feel that they're lesser of the two evils. But as far as our platform and our value, they feel like we don't really hold true to that anymore. So I feel like there's a division in the party, and I feel like there's a disconnect between the party and the voters. As chair of the Hillsborough County Party, do you agree that there's this disconnect between how the voters view the party and what the party really stands for? And if so, what do you think is a resolution between reconnecting to the voters that feel this way?
I think that, and I'm speaking only for the Democratic Party here, but both parties operate under the same rules, the statutory rules.
Both parties meaning the Republican and the Democratic Party?
Correct.
What about the Libertarian Party?
They fall under the same rules.
Okay.
Statutorily. There's a category of other parties,
Gotcha.
and they would fall under that category. I think that part of the problem why there's such a disconnect, I think this is multifactorial. There's no simple answer.
Right.
But one of the most important things, I think that we've been a closed society in terms of the leadership of the Democratic Party. I think we have been very closed, very narrow. We've been sort of an exclusive club.
Right.
And I think that one of the things that we need to do is to open our doors and let more people be involved. That's how they learn about us. That's how they can influence what the party stands for, what the party fights for, what our values are, to have a say in that. So part of the disconnect, I think, is because we've been sort of a closed society.
Do you also think that as this closed society that we've failed in some instances to hold our elected officials accountable to the platform that they ran on?
I think that's true. I think it's also true that elected officials have been an obstacle to the state party having a platform that we can hold them accountable to. So that's why I was so excited last October in our fall convention when we actually passed 14 resolutions, which will be the bedrock foundation of a platform. And it was striking and very interesting to me, and something you mentioned earlier in the podcast about how you're learning things every day.
Right.
That was a shock to me in October to learn that we didn't have a platform. Because we do have one in the county. But at the state level, there was no platform. So, and to find out that elected officials were opposed and pushing against the party having a platform. So it's time for us to stand up for our values, to identify what they are, and to stand up for them, and to expect that our candidates will embrace those values and the platform and run on it. And should there be accountability? I agree there should be accountability.
And for those listeners who might not understand, like, a platform is just a written or a documented list of, you know, what you adhere to as far as your values, what you support, what you don't support. So then that leads me to our disconnect from the voters, and that leads to the division of the party, right? Because it sounds like, aside from these tag words that we use as far as progressives or, you know, old guard, or people who we describe as centrist in the party, that establishment, that there might be a disconnect, not aside from the values, but also in how accessible we make the party and how open we are.
Correct.
And that the frustration for me as a progressive working in the party is everyone has this kind of circular logic, who don't want to be involved with the party, who would like to make those changes of, oh, it's so corrupt. It's just this, you know, thing that's never going to change. They just want to push us out. And so they voluntarily give up any right or influence that they would have by joining the party and fighting for the values that they want. And they kind of allow these party insiders who don't want change and don't want it open and don't want it accessible, and who, you know, probably are defensive or not welcoming to new members who have different ideas joining the party. You know, it's like they give them exactly what they want. They allow them to kind of push them out of the party and, you know, have free reign on the party, and it's never going to change and it's never going to grow if people who want that change don't join and fight for that. So I always see that very interesting circular logic of, oh, I can't join the party because it's this corrupt system. And I'm always saying, well, then join it and change it. But then you have fractions in the party who are fighting against that. Why do you think they're fighting against that?
Well, I think that we do have all those groups that you mentioned. We have a progressive wing, we have centrists, we have establishment, we have people that are actually right. lean more right or tend to be a little conservative in our party, and that's what makes us the Big Tent Party, what we describe as the Big Tent Party, because there's a long spectrum
right.
that encompasses the Democratic Party. So I can understand people's frustration, but all I can say about that is that I have learned over these last 4 years that if you want to make change, mm-hmm. and we have made significant change at the county party level, that the way to do that is to be if you're not at the table, you don't have a voice. So you need to be at the table. And I would like to see more people at the table having a voice. And that's why I advocate for opening up not only our county party, but our state party. But we have to open up the state party so that we can open up the county party.
Right.
And, because we live under the rules of the Florida Democratic Party. So, I think being on the inside and advocating and getting involved is how we make that change.
Why would people push back against that? Why would Democrats not want our party to be as open and reflective, not even out of caring about democracy, because that's truly democracy, but out of the sheer sense of winning? I mean, if we don't have a true reflection of all the voices, giving us ideas of what they want and connecting us to the voters, we can't be as successful. I mean, if we have only party insiders making all the decisions who are disconnected from many of the voters, because just naturally working inside the party, like you said, you start to insulate yourself with people who are very politically aware and who, understand the structure, and you start to disconnect from people who don't have the same connection to politics. So just out of sense of survival and success, wouldn't it make sense to open up the party so we can connect to the voters again?
Well, that makes sense to me, Jessica. Mm-hmm. And there's certainly a faction within our party mm-hmm. who are resistant to change, are resistant to opening up the party. And I can't speak for anybody individually,
sure.
But the kinds of things I hear is it'll be too expensive, it's too many people, and then there's the notion that I carrying 34 votes can express the will of the entire county.
All right, so we're going to have to back up with that, because okay. that's confusing to a lot of people who don't understand the party structure. So within the party, there are some people who are resistant to change, and what I'm hearing is it might be for various reasons. It might be just that they're used to that, or they don't understand change, or they're worried about how the change will impact things. But then there are some people who might have a certain amount of established power,
correct,
in shaping the party, that if we open it up and we divide the power equally, they will lose some of their power. So when you talk about so many votes, this is where it's going to get really complicated, is that for each county, they have elected officials, which we call our state committee people, right? Our state committee man or our state committee women. And then based on how many voters are in that county, when they go to vote for things at the state level, that helps shape our state party. And then, if they're elected as DNC members, then it shapes the national party. Based on if they are a bigger county with more voters, they have more votes when they go to vote on things. Is that correct? Am I describing that right?
Yes. So we have a small group of people who share well over 1,000 votes. So I can't quote the exact numbers, but we have roughly 200. I'll just pick numbers that I think are close. Mm-hmm. Roughly 250 people who share over 1,000 votes.
So to give an example, if we have a very small county that only has so many voters, they're not proportionally represented when they go to vote on things. So they might have 5 or 10 votes, whereas someone with a larger county, because they represent more voters, when they go in and they cast the same vote as that person in the smaller county, their votes count for more. They have maybe 30 or 40 votes. So if, let's say, the 7 largest counties wanted to come together and pool all of their votes, it is a possibility that those 7 counties could decide and be a majority, regardless of whether every single one of the smaller counties, which I don't know how many we have, 60 counties or something like that?
We have 67 counties.
67 counties.
So theoretically, we could have 67 county parties. And each one of those county parties would be given an allocation of votes depending on the number of Democratic voters they have and their turnout performance at the last gubernatorial election.
Ah, I did not know that.
So it's
learning something every day.
Correct. So and that's called the weighted vote. Uh-huh. And that's what is controversial right now within the party. We have been directed by the National Party to several years ago to change our bylaws, to make it the party more open and to go to a more democratic way of voting, which is one person, one vote. Instead of this
let me try to
system.
back up because that's confusing for listeners who don't understand. This whole concept is confusing in general. So back to the concept of, let's take Hillsborough County for example. Okay, we're a larger county. We're one of the 7 largest counties. So we have how many votes when we go and vote? It counts for how many altogether?
Hillsborough County is currently allocated 68 votes, and that is shared between 2 people, the state committee man and the state committee woman.
Now, does every county have 2 people, regardless of how many votes that they have, that splits up and holds the power of those counties, 1 male and 1 female? That's how it's written right now.
If there is a county DEC, there are...
Because some of our counties don't have.
Right. Right. We have about 10 counties that do not have a DEC. So each county that has a DEC gets to elect a state committee man and a state committee woman who will then carry their votes to the governing body of the Florida Democratic Party.
Now, who gets to elect that? Everybody? Or elected precinct committee people?
Elected precinct committee people get to elect the officers of the county party. So the chair, right down, vice chairs, secretary, treasurer, and state committee men and women.
So from what I understand, when you say like 1 person, 1 vote, because that's super confusing and a lot of people have slanted that to say, well, that means each county only gets 1 vote and that, Hillsborough County will have less power now and these larger counties won't have big power. But that's not what that means. 1 person, 1 vote means that if we have 68 votes, that as opposed to 2 people carrying those votes, that you're allocating each one of those votes is represented by a different person.
Correct.
So that you'd have 64 elected people. So if you wanted to pass something or lobby for something or you wanted to make some change, instead of having to convince only 2 people for all of those 68 votes to vote in favor of whatever changes you want, you have the opportunity to reach out and talk to someone representing, 1 person representing each of those votes.
Yes. So if, let's say that, again, using Hillsborough County as the example, that we have 68 votes. And if we were to go to 68 people, different people casting those votes, it is more likely that the voting of that block of 68 people will be more representative of the needs, the desires of the county party than having 2 people do that.
Right.
It would also bring more people into the process. That opens the party up. More people are involved in decision making.
Absolutely.
More ideas get expressed. And we look more like our county party. There's more diversity.
Now, you said the National Party has put some pressure on us to change this. How many states have not already changed that?
As far as I know, there's only 1 other state that has the weighted vote, and that is Maryland.
So 48 out of the other states have gotten on board and realized that this is the progress of opening up our party and have adapted these rules. But as far as Florida and Maryland have not. So what I've heard in discussing this, some strange logic to how this is not good for our party and not a good choice is someone has mentioned to me, and some of the pushback that I've heard is that this hurts minorities because of the fact that many of these state committee women might possibly be women of color or minorities in general, and that by then, taking away and breaking up the power for these women who have fought so hard, women of color or who represent marginalized communities, that you're taking away their power and you're hurting these minority communities, and that, statistically the people who are going to get involved are probably not going to be as representative for, marginalized and, minority communities, and that this is an attack on marginalized communities.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the marginalized communities.
Okay.
So certainly LGBTA community, the disabled community, women, people of color,
right,
whether they're Hispanic, African American, Asian,
island.
So there are lots of, and this is one of the things that I value most about the Democratic Party, is that we have a lot of constituencies within the Democratic Party. And, what I push back on is the notion that two people are representative of all those minority groups. And wouldn't 68 people be more representative? Wouldn't we have more input from women? Wouldn't we have a chance to have more input from the LGBTA community? Wouldn't we have a chance to have more progressive thought and input? Wouldn't we have a chance to have more disabled people participating in the process? So if you have more people involved, you're more likely to have greater representation from those marginalized groups than just by choosing two people.
Now, those two people, how do they decide how they want to vote for things? I mean, it sounds like to me you elect two people and you're just kind of at the whim of hoping that they, hold up for whatever platform. And generally there's not much of a platform for state committee people to run on. I mean, how do we safeguard ourselves from two people abusing the fact that they have a majority of votes and voting in the way that they want, as opposed to being reflective to what the people in their county want? Okay, so
in Hillsborough County, we're fortunate in that we have a bylaw provision that does require our state committee man and state committee woman to go to the DEC or the county party and ask for input into any particular votes that are going to come up at the governing body of the state party. Not all counties have that. And I will tell you that even though that provision has been in our bylaws,
yes,
our county party until recently
yes,
has not made it clear to the state committee man and woman that that is expected.
I see.
So under the new leadership, we have been expecting state committee man and state committee woman to seek input from the county before they cast those votes. Now, in other counties, what I'm hearing is, you're elected, we trust you to vote the way you think you should. There are other counties who take it upon themselves to go to their county party and ask the questions.
The committee people.
The committee people. So there's a diversity of approaches going on here, which is part of the problem with the party, I think, is that in some corners of the state, there's more input, and the vote of those two people are more reflective of their county party. And then there are places where it's a personal choice and their vote reflects their personal positions.
So our bylaws say that our state committee people should reflect if we've taken a vote from our county party and the members. Now, you don't have to be an elected precinct committee person to join the party and vote for this kind of stuff and attend the meetings and have some say of what happens at our county party. So now we're talking about, we have this weighted vote that if we want to make it more inclusive and open up the party, we're trying to break up. how do we decide if we can break up that weighted vote and become in compliance? What makes that decision?
Well, the most troubling thing about this whole process, I've been on the committee that has been working to change our bylaws.
So it's a bylaw committee. This is a bylaw change that we're trying to make at the state party level.
That is correct.
Okay.
Our state party bylaws are over 40 years old.
Okay.
They need to be contemporized.
So the bylaws are just like what they sound like. There are laws that govern our party, either at the county level or even our caucus has them. They're rules that you agree to when you become and that you adapt and that you can change. Almost like a constitution of the party, I would say, depending at what level you're at.
They're bylaws, they're governing bylaws or rules that any organization generally has. And they can be changed through a process. Ours just have not been changed in over 40 years. So as the state has grown, our population has grown, the number of Democrats have grown, our party bylaws, our structure has not changed to reflect those changes. We're behind the 8 ball here. And given the kinds of things that you talked about at the outset, the disconnect with the voters, the divisions, we can't eliminate those things if we're not more open and more accessible to the voter.
So who passes these bylaws changes if we want to change this?
These bylaws changes that this ad hoc committee that I've worked on are promoting will be in the middle of April, be coming before the state executive committee. That is the committee that votes by weighted vote. So the old structure, the one we're trying to eliminate,
is being voted on,
will be the determining body, and the old rules will decide whether or not the new rules get adopted.
So let's say I'm the state committee person of Hillsborough County. You're asking me, or whoever's promoting these changes, who's ever in favor of breaking up the weighted vote, is asking me to kind of vote against, to give up my power, right? You're asking me to cast a vote to say, opening up the party, allowing more people to be representative is, that's more important to me than hanging on to my large voting block that I have. So the same people, you're asking the same people to decide this who will essentially kind of be opening up their power so much, giving away parts of their
sharing. I would like to look at it as sharing that power and making a decision that is more in keeping with the greater good than personal preference.
Okay, so we have this coming up. So are the Hillsborough County State Committee men and women going to vote on this at the state level and cast their votes about whether or not they want to get rid of the weighted vote?
They will be.
And so you said per our bylaws that they should seek our input as a county and there should be some kind of a vote and that they should be reflective and vote in favor of how we ask them to vote. How do they get that information? When is that decided? How do we tell them whether or not we want the vote opened up?
Well, we actually have a meeting on March 19th, the next county meeting.
Is that Monday? This Monday? Is that tomorrow?
That is tomorrow.
Tomorrow, okay.
So, and that issue is on the agenda.
It's on the agenda. Okay. So tomorrow at the regular Hillsborough County Democratic meeting, all the people that come up, you're going to say, here's this issue. We're trying to figure out at the state level if we can change our bylaws and open up the weighted vote, and both sides are going to plead their case, and then the body of the county is going to decide. And based on what they decide, our state committee man and state committee woman should then go to the state party and cast their votes to be reflective of what's decided at that meeting. Is that correct?
That's my expectation, yes.
Okay. So that says, one, that people who are trying to keep an eye on our state party, our county party, and really see if we're making some of the changes that I hear people are calling for should show up at this meeting if they're already joined the party. Now, can you join the party tomorrow night?
And there will be people who will be joining the party tomorrow night, yes.
Will they get to vote on this?
They absolutely will.
Okay. So join your county party cast votes in the way that you think our party should either be more inclusive or less inclusive or whatever you feel, and then watch to see if our elected state committee man and state committee women actually are reflective and cast that vote at the state level, which you said is happening at a conference. What date?
April 3rd. Actually, the date of that meeting, I believe, is April 15th, Sunday, April 15th in Orlando at the Rosen Center. Is the next state executive committee meeting.
Now, are people who aren't party insiders, quotation mark, which means people who have really paid attention to the party, joined the party, understand the structure, gotten involved, the big D's, which I'll explain in a minute. Are they welcome to go to these meetings?
Absolutely. Any registered Democrat can go to these meetings.
And do they get to watch what happens and what people say and all of that stuff? So they can keep an eye if they feel very, very passionate about this and go to these meetings and watch what's happening.
Absolutely. And they can attend the trainings that we do too. So
as far as the pushback from people who might not want this specific thing, what are some of examples of the reasoning that they're using that this would be a bad choice?
I think, I mentioned a couple earlier on, the expense. Mm-hmm. So we are not likely to end up with 68 people going to the state party to vote. Mm-hmm. That is a very difficult number to manage, if you will. And the expense of that would be really an obstacle.
Right.
So we are looking for an allocation method. Currently, we reviewed the allocation method of how many votes each county gets based on the number of registered Democrats and their voting performance. There's this complicated formula that determines how Hillsborough County got its 68 votes. So we're looking for a different formula and a different way of allocating the votes. Mm-hmm. So our goal is to have an allocation system that allows more counties in the state to have a little louder voice. Mm-hmm. And so that 14 people, or the 2 representatives from the 7 largest counties, cannot control all the decisions that are made.
At the state level.
Mm-hmm. That there's more input and from across the state. Mm-hmm. So on the other hand, though, we still need to give the large counties where the density of our voters are still some voting power.
Right.
But 14 people should not be able to control the entire state.
Absolutely not.
Otherwise, it's not going to be representative.
Absolutely.
So we need to find an answer to the allocation process. It's very complicated, and we're not all on the same page yet. I don't even know if that question will be answered before the meeting on the 15th. But certainly, I think the decision ought to be made that we eliminate the weighted vote and then work out the details of what that allocation system is going to be.
Now, here's another question that I have. What other changes are we talking about in a bylaw? Because what I've also heard is that we've mentioned before, and it's complicated, that in order to participate in electing our state committee person or our chair, that while you might be able to vote on things as just being a member of our party and going to a county meeting and joining the party, that you don't actually get to vote for our elected officials and who's going to represent us unless you're an elected state precinct captain. So are there provisions in the new bylaws that change that and allow people who aren't elected precinct committee people to participate in electing these people?
Jessica, I have to confess, I don't remember the answer to that. What I do remember the answer to is that any registered Democrat can join the county party and that there are more categories of membership.
Okay.
We created more categories. We created a category for people who, for whatever reason, couldn't be a precinct committee man or woman. Mm-hmm. So that there is a category for people to come in and not have to assume the responsibility for organizing a precinct.
I see.
So that does open it up more. But the other thing that we did, one of the other bylaws, is that changes that we proposed is that any Democrat in the state of Florida could run for state party chair. Now, in the past, you had to be a county chair, a county vice chair, or a state committee man or woman to be eligible to vote, to run for state party chair. So one of the bylaw changes that we made was that any registered Democrat in the state of Florida could run for state chair as long as they had certain, thresholds that they met. They had so many signatures. They had endorsements from X number of people, and I can't off the top of my head what
qualifying.
That is. Qualifying
Guidelines like you would have for if you're going to run for an office. So these all sound like positive changes. And then this is going to lead me into kind of a dicey area, but I feel like it's been something that's been on my mind a lot lately. And it's probably going to be controversial. But
should I brace myself?
Probably. You should usually brace yourself in a conversation with me in general. But like I said, one of the pushbacks that I heard was that it closes off power to some of the marginalized communities and people, diverse people or women of color who have gained this power. And I feel like some of the things that I've been seeing play out in local politics on the state level has me worried. And this is going to be kind of a deviation, but I wanted to get your feedback on this. So I'll give you, there are some very powerful movements that are happening right now. Mm-hmm. There's the Me Too movement. There's the Black Lives Matter movement that, just kind of highlights a lot of the, racial justice movements that are happening all over. And, as, someone who feels very protective of the Me Too movement, for personal reasons and have been advocating for something similar for the Me Too movement for a very long time, what I do fear and what I think I've seen, and it's hard to say because, once you have these movements, any pushback can be seen as victim blaming, or if you have questions, you're automatically victim shaming. But what I worry about is, since I've heard the fact that, breaking up the weighted vote is going to hurt communities, marginalized communities, I wonder what safeguards we have for people who would abuse these movements, be it the Me Too movement, and accuse people of things that might not necessarily be true, or, accuse different groups who are actually advocating for marginalized groups and turn that around and spin it to say that they're actually making decisions that hurt those communities. How do we safeguard ourselves from people who would abuse the great things that have come out of these movements? And how do we define or differentiate what is, truly part of the movement and progress for victims and equality, or people who might, have ulterior motives and take advantage of these movements? How do we protect ourselves as Democrats and just as a nation? Do you have any feedback on that?
Wow, that's a complicated, very complicated. You used the word dicey. That's multifactorial also. Mm-hmm. One of the things that's concerned me about the Me Too movement, and that's a movement that I too personally am advocating for, feel strongly about because of my own personal experience. Sure. There aren't too many of us who haven't had a personal experience.
Women and men.
Correct. And men too.
Sure.
Absolutely. We can't leave them out. And, I worry about the movement. Somewhere there has to be a balance. Mm-hmm. There has to be a balance. We have to hear those issues. We have to have a national dialogue about those issues. We have to broaden the conversation. Mm-hmm. We have to broaden and allow more voices to be heard about those issues so that we can understand all the dynamics and all the complicated facets of this particular issue and this movement. And I think you're right. I think that there are people that have used that movement for political gain. Mm-hmm. So that's where the balance comes in. One of the issues that I have struggled with is needing to hear the voice and hear the complaint, but there's been a race to judgment at times for for the accused.
Right.
And automatically that person is guilty.
Mm-hmm.
So I worry about us as women in the Me Too movement going so far with this movement that there is a backlash against women.
Right.
I worry that there will be some doors closed for women because out of the fear that somebody might accuse me of something and then I'm automatically guilty. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I worry about that. And I worry about that a lot. So I think it's incumbent upon us to have the dialogue, to engage in rational dialogue, and to look at all the perspectives. I don't know how you make any guarantees that it's not used for political gain. All organizations are political. Right. Our communities are political. I'm sure you see that in your CCD and work. And schools are. Every community has its politics. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us involved in the movement that we advocate for what's important, but do it in a rational and fair way. Right. And not go so far extreme that we end up having a boomerang effect. Right. Or hurting ourselves in the process.
Well, that's what I worry about. I mean, as a member of the Me Too movement who have advocated for victims long before I feel like it was a more popular movement, I feel that by overly allowing the movements to be abused, it really then takes away from the power of the victims that they're trying to gain, that we're trying to gain, that, when we have, people who have been accused of things and you don't know who accused them and it's hearsay and somebody said this and, it's on par with, Harvey Weinstein and that, all of this is, amplified and, that there's all this hyperbole, that real victims, that their stories and their voices and their power are going to be trivialized amongst people who are, accusing people for political reasons or to gain power, or who are, taking stories and slanting them to hurt people. I'm very, very, and it's not just with the Me Too. Again, it's with, the social and the racial justice movement. I'm very, very nervous about how to protect these movements for abuse. So like I said, I just wanted to get your opinion and kind of put that out there. But it does lead me to my next question with you. I feel like we're running out of time. We probably are. I always go over. But recently there was a story kind of written about you in Florida Politics, I believe it is, or about our county. Is it Florida Politics? Doesn't sound like you've seen it, but there was an article.
Why didn't you send it to me, Jessica?
But I see a lot of articles in general, especially from I believe Florida Politics, that come out and present you specifically in a very negative light. That anytime there's the slightest bit of political gossip at all, it's almost like there are people in the party who have a personal vendetta against you in general and maybe things that you're trying to do that contact these news sources in quotation marks, because as far as I've heard, they're paid consultants that get paid to be on one side or the other. So it doesn't really sound like news organizations to me, hence the reason I'm doing this podcast. But and they write this article, and I've seen it, and I've been at events where it's very slanted and it's untrue, and they quote unnamed sources, who are anonymous, and they take quotes from you and they put them out of context and they slant what's really happening. And again, I know because I've been there for a majority of these events. So why do you think that in a lot of the local media that you're villainized so harshly?
That's a very fascinating question, and I certainly have opinions about that. How much time do I have, Mr. Engineer? Let's just take a look at where the party was 5 years ago, or even 4 years ago, when Elizabeth Belcher was elected chair and I was elected first vice chair. We came in and we had, $4,000 or $5,000 in the bank.
Wow.
We're a county party. we had no minutes.
Wow. So for every meeting, every single where there's elected bodies, there's supposed to be a record of what happens at these meetings, which are called minutes, that people can go and review and see who said what and kind of hold us accountable for the meetings that we're having. So there aren't these backdoor meetings that people aren't privy to the information.
Right. So let me just back up, because that's an injustice to Elaine Mendez Hall, who is our treasurer. So she was treasurer. Secretary, I'm sorry. For about 7 or 8 months, maybe 9 months before we got in office. She was appointed because the secretary moved away. She was given no minutes for umpteen years that this body has been in existence. Since Elaine has been secretary, we now have minutes, and we have taken meticulous care to maintain records. She has all the minutes on thumb drives, and now we're using the cloud. So we have storage so that we actually can pass this body of knowledge on. That's our institutional knowledge of what our organization has been through, on to whoever becomes the next chair, whoever becomes the next secretary, right? So
we were a mess. Needless to say.
We were a mess. So we had no records. We had no money.
Right.
We used to have an office, and that got closed, because there was no,
structure.
There was no structure, no perceived need, or whoever was the chair didn't want to take the time to raise the money to continue to support the office. So the office got closed. I think that has contributed to the disconnect with our voters, because we're not out there. We're not in the community. We're not visible. We're not seen unless we knock on somebody's door or call them. So I think that we're not actually physically in the community, and that's a problem. So, and then when you go back and you look at, who was steering the ship and how far it had tipped into the listed sideways and started taking on significant water. That was alarming to us when we took office in 2014. So we have really righted the ship. We are meticulous about keeping records. We're doing audits. We're doing reports. We try to be as transparent as we can. We give reports at every meeting. We make them available to people. Soon they're going to be on the website, so that people can actually go and look at them. We made gains in the last election.
Yes, absolutely.
And we're going to make even bigger gains this next election. So I think that there's an element of, envy maybe. There's certainly, there's a perceived, maybe people think that there's a blemish on their record while they were in control. There's also different people in control of the party right now.
Right.
Who would think that a little small town girl from Plant City would be in charge of the county party? Usually it's people from South County, South Tampa, who are in control of the party.
Do you think, and you might not want to answer this question, so you can say no comment, because I don't want to put you in the hot seat. Do you think there are some people that had abused the party, and that when you came in to make specific changes, however they abuse the party to maintain power, are angry and threatened by that, so they might choose to ruin your reputation publicly with the connections that they have so they can maintain power in the party and continue to abuse it for their own gain?
I could say no comment to that. I mean, I can't speak to people's motivations.
Right.
But I can say that what I have tried to do is to live and die by the bylaws. Okay? I think the bylaws are a contract that we have with our constituency. And so I think those bylaws are there for a purpose. They're there to guide us. So I've been fairly strict with the bylaws. And when there's been a question about the bylaws, and wasn't sure the history behind them or the intent behind them, or did the state party have power over our party bylaws? They do.
Sure.
Robert's rules also plays in here. I would seek guidance from the state party on those. And I have made some decisions that have been unpopular, but I feel very confident that I was following the bylaws. So that's what I mean by you live and die by the bylaws. I think it's my legal responsibility. I have a fiduciary responsibility for this organization. And that's not only monetary, but that's ethics, that's compliance, that's a host of other issues that I have fiduciary responsibility for the organization. I and the other officers.
Right.
So I try to be very strict about the bylaws. And so in doing that, there have been people who didn't interpret the bylaws the way that I did, and that has inflamed some people or aggravated some people. And I think that's where some of the hostility comes from. But I try to take the high road. I try to take the high road as much as possible and, live by those bylaws, get help with those bylaws when I need them, especially when there's questions over interpretation.
So let me ask you about those bylaws, because I think people need to know about this as well. We have committees that help write these bylaws, right? So it's not like there's just the elected officials that sit back and they make all of the rules and they make our platform. If people want to have a say about our county party, if they want to change our bylaws, if they want to get involved, if they want to change what you're interpreting, if they want to change our platform and making sure that we're supporting things like ending the war on drugs, which I'll get to in a little while, they can volunteer for these committees, right? These are committees where you appoint people and become part of these committees and advocate and work to change these bylaws and our platforms. This isn't just some untouchable group that writes this. These are you, me, Nina Tatlock, people who, want to get involved and help shape this. Again, they have to go to meetings and there's disagreements, and it's an arduous process. Nobody's saying this is easy, but it's not closed off to anybody who wants to help. Am I right?
Absolutely. Many hands makes for lighter work. So, and the more people we have involved in those committees, the more voices we have, the more opinions, the more, people will think of things that a smaller group might not have thought about. So, the more voices we have, the more representative the outcome will be of their work. So I encourage every new member orientation I do, I let them know that we have committees and that we invite them to participate in the committees and the clubs and caucuses, because we want involvement. I want people to feel like they have an ownership and a stake in the outcome.
Cause I hear a lot of criticism about bylaws and platform, and I try to tell people, well, then help change it. If there's something you don't like, show up to the meeting, have your voice heard. And what I'm going to move to now is some of the questions that I've gotten from people, because I always try to put out there what guests I'm going to have. It's kind of short notice, but to see what people want to ask. And a lot of these questions seem to be more from a progressive vantage point. So you will kind of see a slant in that way. I'm sorry. Those are the people who responded to me. And as a progressive, I just want to say that what we've talked about in general, as far as breaking up the weighted vote or not allowing the party to move in ways that are positive, even if it means giving up personal power. When people are trying to identify as progressives, one thing that helps me lead people to whether or not they might be progressive, because it's this huge tag word now. And as you mentioned, there's a spectrum. There's no litmus test that people like to talk about. And it's very hard to identify because you may be very progressive on one end of the scheme. And then there's an issue you're a little more conservative about, and it puts you at odds. And it's a very troubling, word to try to identify. But I think that if you're for making any of the processes more democratic and being more inclusive and giving up your own power or, to make sure that more people are included and that we're more reflective. That's the word I kind of like to go back to when I'm thinking about progressive, whether it's as an elected official or the direction that we're trying to move in, that we're reflecting the people who are voicing their needs and their issues and their wants is to me, the members of the progressive caucus or the progressive members are always pushing to make things more inclusive and representative and talking about the groups who might not have a strong voice or might be marginalized or we might be fighting for or have a disadvantage. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that as I go into more of these progressive questions.
I like your definition.
So I mentioned before, and you might not have an answer for this, but I like Asher and I wanted to include this question.
I like Asher. I want to answer his question.
He did want to know if the Democratic Party will take a stand on ending the war on drugs, and if so, how likely that is.
That's not a question I'm in a position to answer for the party.
Sure.
Okay? Mm-hmm. That's far bigger than me. That's way above my pay grade, if you will.
Which
okay?
is zero, by the way. We get paid nothing for this.
Right. This is all volunteer work. I think that's a Tom Perez question. But for me personally, and I'm going to address this to Asher, I think we should end the war on drugs.
That's an interesting answer considering the last article I read yesterday said that Trump wants to enact the death penalty for drug dealers. Have you read that?
I did see that.
Interesting. Do you think it's likely that will be something? Do you hear on the state level or at the national level in these platform talks or bylaws changes that anybody's advocating for that?
Well, one thing that we saw in the Obama administration and we saw here with our own state attorney,
right,
is
Andrew Warren, a Democrat, is not punishing people for having small amounts of, let's say, marijuana in the pocket. And especially children, right? This whole school to prison pipeline issue. And then what happened when Trump came into office, he told his attorney general, Jeff Sessions,
to impose the strongest penalty on every single crime. And I've heard from a voter in our county where that has actually happened. Our own state attorney was working with this individual, to work out, an agreeable sentence. And then the feds got involved and they cited Jeff Sessions' edict from the president that they take the harshest punishment. So we're actually seeing the implementation of this administration, the Washington administration, the current administration of Washington's new rules on policing,
even filtering
all the way down to our county level, and it is hurting our citizens. So do I think there's any chance of it happening in the near future? Not with the current elected officials that we have in Washington. And the only way that we can change that and to make progress, go back to the progress that our own state attorney was trying to make on this issue, beginning to make progress on this, is to vote them
Democrats
out. Vote them out. Vote the people making these current restrictive, draconian policies out.
So essentially, if you like drugs, don't vote for Republicans. I'm just kidding. I won't make you answer that one. We'll go on to the next one. One of the questions I had, and this is actually a question that's near and dear to my heart, because they cited that there are some caucuses working on this, and they mentioned the Black and Hispanic caucus, but actually the Progressive Caucus has taken the lead on this quite heavily to reach out to many different communities, specifically marginalized communities, and give them a voice and talk about their issues. But what is the vision our local party has to attract and reach out to minority beyond the work that the caucuses do? So the question is, what is the county party doing, not just through its clubs and caucuses, to reach to these communities that feel that they've been forgotten and abandoned by our party as a whole? Right,
exactly. Well, a couple of things come to mind immediately, Jessica. One is that we've tried to be more visible in these communities. In the last election cycle, we spent some of our Get Out the Vote funds on Black radio and brought a lot of our candidates into the Black radio stations. It was a Black Hispanic radio station to give those listeners a chance to get to know our candidates. Another thing that we're doing currently at our other events that we've been to. So we've been to the MLK Gala, and we've invested in that gala, being a table sponsor. The Toba Breakfast, the Caribbean Festival, some Hispanic festivals. So we have been having more of a presence, physically having a booth at those events. So that's one of the things that we've been doing to reach out into those communities. The other thing that we have done at the county level that we're going to be voting on Monday, at the April meeting, but we'll be introducing tomorrow at our March 19th meeting, is one of the proposed bylaw changes is to change the Affirmative Action Committee to the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, so that we're not just focusing on the African American community. We're focusing on people with disabilities, with, the Asian population, women, focusing on diversity in general and not one particular group. So that committee will be looking at how can we reach out into these communities and get more of these people involved.
Right. Well, so that leads me to a couple thoughts. First of all, I can think of something that you're not mentioning.
Okay, go ahead.
I think that as a county party, taking stand on important issues that speak to the communities, such as when we had the monuments debate, and that there was a very clear side of I don't know what you would call them other than white supremacists. I don't know what they call themselves, their organization, but, fighting to keep these monuments. And you as the chair and our county took a very definitive stance on that and was quite outspoken, much to being attacked on several different levels for that. And also being sued.
Personally sued.
And the county party. So I think that when I look at that question, I have a few different answers that range from taking a stand on issues strongly that affect those communities, which I see our party doing, and I feel like you didn't really get the credit for that. And then that's a big thing because there are lots of county parties where there are monument debates happening where they're not getting involved and they're not taking a stand. Right. So standing up for the issues that are important to these communities, whether it's meaning that they walk into a public space and don't feel traumatized by the past, or making sure we advocate for policies that affect their community. But also, I think what the Progressive Caucus is looking to help the party start doing is getting into these communities by supporting their commerce, right? So Martin Luther King is a big thing. So Candy Low has the Black Business Bus Tour that happens every few months. And, I do see some political candidates coming to that, but I would definitely like to see a stronger presence with that. I know that Natasha Goodley is doing things where she's going into the communities and paying off, outstanding lunch balances, and she's making sure that over breaks kids have food, and, community issues where, I know we have outreach where we go and we feed, we help at shelters and we help with, the homeless. And what I would like to see is some of that outreach in the community, specifically be focused on communities of color and help building the infrastructure of the community with our support without connecting and expecting that pays off at the voting booth and just because it's the right thing to do at the party. Would you say you agree with that?
Absolutely. I agree with that. And that's why we've tried to have more of a presence in these communities in a way that we have never had before. I love the concept of the Black business bus tour. And,
it's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, it is. And I've been trying to help Candy get a couple of candidates on those because I think it's important to have candidates and elected officials on those bus tours.
Have you been on one of those tours yet?
I have not yet.
Andrew Gillum went on one.
I know
when he was in town. I went on the last one. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
It's a shame that this one is on the same day of the Spring Fling because I'm assuming you can't go.
Well, I'll be pretty tied up, but with a number of events that day. Out in Plant City, we have another event going on that day that I'll be at, registering voters and that type of thing. So from my point of view, there's always 20 things I have to do. So my plan is certainly to make one of those bus tours, and to encourage our DEC members to participate in those.
And buy lots of stuff. Because the stuff it's pretty amazing.
Take your pocketbook with you. Yeah.
Okay. So we're running out of time. I don't want to pivot from that question, but I want to make sure that we fit in a few more questions. So I'm going to kind of combine the next question because it seems like it's from the progressive vantage, and it's kind of the feeling that I get from progressives are, what are we doing within our party to help support the progressive movement that doesn't necessarily equate campaign success with just fundraising? Mm-hmm. You know, who aren't necessarily interested in only supporting the party by our pocketbooks or coming. And I don't discount by any means that, because the next question is, how are we going to fund all the different races? That fundraising and these events that we throw are not important, and that we have to have a strong budget to support candidates. And I know you can and have several times, you know, talked about candidates that we've kind of pushed over the edge by giving them the extra money when they've run out of their own money and had a voice on county commission or different seats. But not everybody is motivated in that way. So I think some of the questions are, how do we open up the party so we are telling progressives we value what you bring to the party, even though it might not be an emphasis on fundraising or going to these big gala events? And how do we, you know, encourage them to work to get the party back to the working class voters, you know, because I think, again, that's part of this disconnect that we talk about, is the working class doesn't feel like the party is really supporting their issues. You know, sometimes even in our platform, it's like, can we support $15 an hour instead of $12 an hour? Or that should be a no-brainer. Or, you know, I mean, I'm glad to see that we've gotten behind this, you know, voter rights restoration as a party, but that might not have always happened in the past. And, you know, so it's, I guess the questions are more like, where is the place in our party for progressives that place a different value on making our candidates successful and what our priorities should be?
Well, I think you can take a look at this issue both statewide and countywide. Mm-hmm. From a countywide perspective, our donor base are our citizens. Mm-hmm. Okay? We don't take money from banks and that type of thing. And
you don't?
No. And oddly enough, they don't come to our meetings either. The CEOs and these bank presidents don't come to our meetings. So Wall Street's not in our back pocket, or we're not in theirs.
At least at the county level.
At least at the county level, right. So we do have fundraisers, and you know, before 2015, we did not have a victory fund that could help our party. One of the things that upset me so much in 2014 is that we gave 2 candidates $500 and 4 other candidates $250. Okay, now compare that with being able to give our County Commissioner Pat Kemp $23,000 and Andrew Warren $48,000 to help him with his campaign. And we know that made a difference in both of those races. And so we do have to fund our victory fund. And we have 2 major ways that we do that. But and you're right, not everybody can afford to pay $100 for a ticket or $50 for a ticket. We still have to have those events. So one of the things that I have asked our executive director to look at is small donor kinds of programs. And there are several that we're looking at. And I've asked the finance committee to look at that as well. But in the end, it might not even boil down to money. I mean, we do have to have money to operate, right? Sure. There's no doubt about that. But it's boots on the ground. It's picking up the telephone and calling those voters. Those are the non-monetary and equally as important contributions that people can make to get our people elected.
So what I hear you saying is, by empowering and focusing and making sure there's training for precinct committee people, correct, and really making sure that we give the support we need to the grassroots infrastructure as far as working our precincts, and focusing on that just as important. Because I know for me, like, I have a conflict when I think of fundraising, that I absolutely know how imperative it is to have money to put ads on TV and to get the materials that you need. You know, you have, Republicans who just create, untrue commercials that they play over and over again. And you have to have some way to get your message out. And unfortunately, that's not free.
Right.
Even if you want to design a website. So money is important. What I fear is that people place too much emphasis and disconnect from the work they need to do to the voters. So when I hear, somebody might need to raise money, but then they spend $20,000 on a robocall, that I find not as effective as having 20 fired up volunteers going down that list and making personal calls, or that they think that, instead of going canvassing door to door, they can spend a lot of money on mailers, which I hear alternating information on, but the studies that I read is they're nowhere near as effective as someone knocking on your door and contacting you.
Correct.
So I worry that we've become somewhat unsuccessful because we've become lazy, thinking that raising money and doing kind of these lazy campaign tactics is a replacement for the connections that we need to be making at the community. So I think that when progressives push back against fundraising, it isn't because, we hate money, although some of us do. That there's a disconnect that disconnects them. That money becomes a disconnect from the work they need to do to reach the voter.
Yeah. Again, this is a balance issue, right? So the number one most important thing that we need to do as a county party, which is our mission, is to get out the vote. Okay. We need money to do that. Okay. But the most important thing we can do to get out the vote is to have that conversation neighbor to neighbor, right? Knocking on doors. I was out canvassing yesterday, and the very first door I knocked on, I said to him, so what are your concerns in this next election cycle that's coming up?
Right.
First two things, minimum wage and health insurance. First two issues out of his mouth. So those are Democratic issues.
Right.
Right. And, so I had a nice long talk with him, but I wouldn't have gotten that sense if I had not knocked on his door.
Sure.
He lives in a community like this. You wouldn't think that minimum wage and health insurance would be an issue.
A suburban, nicer community.
A suburban community. But it was an issue for him. He had to make a choice. Do I buy this nice house?
Right.
Or do we pay $800 a month for my wife's health insurance?
Sure.
That's a terrible choice to have to make between housing and health insurance, right? That's why we as Democrats think that health care is a right and everybody should have it. So,
well, most Democrats.
Well,
our platform, our national platform.
So, the Democrats and all the Democrats in Hillsborough County
Democrats
ought to think that
healthcare is a human right.
for all is a right.
Absolutely.
And not a privilege for just some.
Right.
So, anyway, so there's a balance. We definitely need to be knocking on doors because that is the number one way that we're going to get people to the polls.
Yeah. And
I don't like it when I knock on somebody's door and they say, I've never heard from anybody in the party before. Well, you are now,
right.
And we're here, and I want you to know that we're here. Here's my name. I want you to be able to contact me if you have an issue. But we also need to fund things like slate cards and help the candidates.
Right.
And so there is a balance. So we do have to fundraise, but we also have to do the groundwork, and that's equally as important.
Okay. And then I have one last question. Again, I had mentioned this is from my friend. She is very, very active in the transportation community, especially with the interstate they were proposing to go through, Seminole Heights and, the whole, issue that we had trying to make sure that we didn't have those toll and express lanes. So she's not really a party insider. She's someone who got inspired on one specific issue and feels very passionate on one issue. So when she's looking at kind of these governing bodies, she's definitely thinking like, how do we get elected officials who might be sympathetic to, my issue? And her question is, will the party, and I'm assuming she needs county party, but I guess she just means the party in general, commit to fully supporting and funding Democratic candidates in every local race, especially in county commission, in order to give our candidates a fighting chance against the musical chair incumbents who have large coffers.
Okay, so now that gets us back to the fundraising,
It does,
right? It brings us right back around to that.
360 degrees.
Right. So it's circular for sure. So, that's why we are emphasize, we have, 4 priorities. Mm-hmm. One is to fundraise to be able to help our candidates. 2 is to do candidate recruitment and development. Mm-hmm. 3 is to do the training and education that we need to focus on getting out the vote. Mm-hmm. And 4 is to participate in the resistance movement. So those are our 4 priorities as a county party. Mm-hmm. So to answer the person who raised that question, yes. Our goal in Hillsborough County is the local races. Mm-hmm. House victory, Senate victory, their priority is the House and Senate. Will we get involved in some of those? We may a little bit, but the majority of our county funds are going to be at the local races. I am committed to taking the majority on the Board of County Commission to make certain that TBX, mm-hmm. Doesn't come in and put a lane through a community that all of a sudden has one side of the tracks and the other side of the tracks. And guess what? People of color live on one side of the tracks. That's not justice. Mm-hmm. And so, we want to make sure that we're electing people that do not allow that to happen. And that also gets into something that you mentioned a little earlier about holding our electeds and our candidates accountable. Mm-hmm. I think that the parties need to do more of that. It's actually in the FDP bylaws. So, I think we need to do more of that, especially if we're going to help these candidates financially. Then I think they need to be listening very closely to those of us who have conversations with them that reflect the needs and the wishes of the community.
But do you prioritize certain races over others?
We will be. Mm-hmm. So, we are focusing on Hillsborough County Board of Commission, mm-hmm. and in particular the 2 countywide races, and I'll explain why. Mm-hmm. Now we know that we have candidates running in district county commission races also. Right. But if you focus on the countywide commission races, mm-hmm. the 2 countywide commission races, you hit every other election that's going on this election cycle. Mm. You hit all the other districts that are Hillsborough County Board of Commission. You hit the Florida Senate races, the Florida House races, school board races. You hit all of those mm-hmm. when you focus on countywide races.
Because you're appealing to all voters and not specifically
because our universe mm-hmm. is all of our voters in the county. Mm-hmm. So our goal is to touch all of our voters in the county and talk to them about all of our candidates.
So would you say kind of our strategy then would be kind of the down ticket? Correct. As we're working for one candidate, we're talking about the other candidates and we're trying to get all down ticket, meaning everyone down the ticket that has a D next to their name elected.
Correct.
By being just as important as whoever the original person that, we're focusing on.
The governor's race yes. So the countywide races, right. So if we focus on those, mm-hmm. And then that'll filter to every other race that's in the county.
So then I guess I have one final question to wrap this up, which we're probably way over time. This might be it feels like a 2-hour long interview at this point. But, as a progressive, I see kind of this circular problem within the party, and I'm not quite sure, how to solve this because there is a division in the party, and we know that to be successful, we have to unify, right? And we have so many things coming down the pipeline and we're not in power, and so I feel like, unfortunately, what we're told as progressives is we don't have the luxury to demand more from our candidates, right? And that there's this kind of disconnect that, it's expected that, any Democrat is better than a Republican and, that there shouldn't, you should always choose the lesser of 2 evils in a race and, that progressives are then saying, well, at some point, if we don't just stop accepting anybody who runs as a Democrat and we just vote for anybody who has the D next to the name, whether they actually uphold the platform or not, we're not going to convince other voters that our party is different from the Republican Party. That the reason the Progressive Party is pushing back on not just supporting anybody who wants to run as a Democrat is because we want to bring some integrity back to our party and our candidates so that we can regain the trust of the voters that we've lost who feel that we don't actually represent their needs. Like if we don't make sure that our politicians are voting in favor of them when they see these votes, they're going to throw their hands up and say, again, there's no difference between the party. And so that we really feel that by advocating for people who uphold the platform and by calling out politicians who aren't voting in favor of our democratic values and by, wanting to primary candidates who haven't been voting in favor of their constituents, people inside the party more so accuse us of being purist and, causing this problem and that we have to vote for Democrat no matter what because that's always going to be better for a Republican. And I feel like, until we kind of figure out a way to communicate to where we're upholding the values and people understand why progressives are taking a stand and why they're issue oriented, and until we have some mutual understanding of why, we want changes within the party, that it's just this, constant arguing between party loyalists who think we should vote for, anything that is Democrat and progressives who are asking more. As a party chair, you must be caught in the middle of this. What do you find as a solution or a way of, pushing our candidates to uphold our platform, to be more progressive in the way that they're worrying about working class people and they're voting in favor of their constituents, and also at the same time, not being so dogmented in, purity that, you're giving up your power and you're not voting in these races and you're refusing to participate in the lesser of two evils and you're taking yourself, out of the process in general. What do you find is like an answer or a balance to this division in the party?
I thought you were going to answer that question, and then I could take it home with me and implement it, Jessica. This is an issue that I've been concerned about since you and I met. And, there's not an easy answer to this. The Democratic Party is the big tent party.
Yeah. And
we have some people who still do not believe that a woman has a right to have an abortion. Okay? That doesn't make them a bad person or a bad Democrat. Their faith comes into that issue. I'm thinking of certain population groups where that's an issue. There are some people who still are not behind, a person's right to marry the person that they love. I don't believe in purity tests. As the chair, I can't take that position.
Right.
Because, as I said, the spectrum is long and it's wide. I think the platform is important. I think that if we're helping candidates financially, we have certain standards that we need to expect them to live up to. I think that we are moving in a place where, as the ship becomes stronger and more sturdy, and as it is headed more surely on a secure course, that we can then take stronger stands on issues when it comes to, we have a Democrat who's on the fundraising committee of a Republican, or we have a Democrat that voted in support of the education bill in up in Tallahassee. So I think that as we grow and as we become stronger and as more people become involved and bring those issues and to the forefront and participate in the process, I think we'll be a stronger organization and we'll be able to have better candidates, have stronger candidates and candidates that, and elected officials who will truly represent the people that elected them.
Do you think we need a new party, a third party? Do you think if we're such a big tent party that it's just unrealistic to try to house all these viewpoints under one party? I mean, it's not logistically going to happen, but
it's not logistically going to happen probably in our lifetime, maybe in yours, but maybe not in mine. You're a little bit younger than I am. But we haven't seen a lot of growth in the third parties to boot. We're stuck right now, unfortunately, with the two-party system. And that's part of what's caused so much division in our country as well. So I think another party would be healthy. I don't know how to make that happen.
Well, I think by when we can open up primaries.
And, we could open primaries for sure.
And change qualification laws for people who want to run on the national level. But that's a whole other podcast that we probably need to talk about. I thank you so much for your time. I know that's always nerve-wracking to come and, talk to people and answer questions. And you always know that I give you some tough questions. So thank you so much for coming out and joining us. Is there anything that you want to say in closing?
No, I just want to thank you. I appreciate the questions. I appreciate the questions that you're asking people to submit questions, and I appreciate everybody that submitted them. Thank you, Asher and others. And we'll keep working on these issues. We just need to remember Rome's not built in a day, was never built in a day. We just got to keep on working. And we need more people to help us do the work.
So people can come tomorrow to the county party, which happens once a month. Is it the second or third Monday at the Children's Board, which is in Ybor?
Correct. East Palm Avenue.
East Palm Avenue. Do you have the exact address for that?
I think it is 11002 East Palm Avenue, but check it on your Google map.
And that's
just Google Children's Board and it'll come right up.
And that starts at what time?
It starts at 6:30, but registration opens at 5:45.
Okay, so people can always come to one of those meetings, check us out.
Right.
What about a website? Do we have a website?
We do have a website, www.hillsboroughcountydemocrats.org.
And can we find our platform on that website?
Yes. You can.
We can. I know. I told somebody the other day they had no idea that they could actually look at our platform.
And in terms of the website, I would like to say it's in transition. We are transitioning to a different platform. So it's not as up to date as we would like it because we're in a transition process. But keep looking at it anyway. Though we keep the most essential information there. But yes, the platform is there.
So come check out the county party or get involved with the club or caucus. And help us change and steer the Democratic Party to one back to that represents the people and help make it successful. So thank you again. This has been Reclaiming My Mind. Hopefully our next podcast will have another exciting guest. If you have any suggestions for issues or topics that you would like for us to talk about, you can email me at jvaughn30 VAUGHN, the number 30 @gmail.com. Thanks so much and have a nice evening.